A new approach for the transformation of the public sector by the government aims to improve the delivery of services provided by the public sector in a hope to improve prosperity in the country. Honourable Premier Toke Talangi called on all public servants to have a say in what can improve the transformation in an effective and efficient application of the restructuring process.
I think they've been very worthwhile. I've enjoyed discussing with all the staff that are available at the meetings. I think one of the complaints that we've had in the past is that staff have not been being part of the consultation process or discussions with respect to this, or in fact part of the knowledge, if you wish, that the government has with respect to what the government plans to do over the next 2 or 3 years and beyond that. And they appreciated the fact of the thinking that has gone behind some of the historical, if you like, analysis that has been done to enable us to reach a point where we say, yep, that happened in the 1960s. We need to have a look at whether that structure still is appropriate for the times that we're in, for example, or whether we should consolidate everything into 4 or 5 sectors. And that's essentially what Dr. Luffy has recommended in the first report with respect to public service. And we've agreed to the principle of that. Well, now what we need to do is figure out how we can implement those. And she's come back with a report on the second part of that process that we have not agreed to in total. We will vet this with the Public Service Commission as well, and then we'll go on from that.
Premier Talangi said that there are unwritten agreements between government and public servants.
They've seen the layout of what we've done with respect to the transformation, and they appear to be happy with that, but obviously they want to know a bit more about what's going to happen. I think the other thing that I reminded them of is the fact that all of us are accountable. They're accountable to me. My contract, and there is an unwritten contract that we have with all of them in the public service, and that contract means that every fortnight I pay them, make sure that I have the financial resources of the government to pay them, and every fortnight, without fail, that's what we've done. I expect in return an unwritten contract from them to agree to do the work that we expect them to do on behalf of us. And finally, with regard to that, is the fact that all are accountable. They are to me, and I am accountable to the people, and we are, after all, we all are accountable to the people of Niue. The Hizda departments, most of them are aware that the systems that we have, or the structures we have at the prison, are just cumbersome, too large, need to be consolidated. Some of the things that have really changed with infrastructure and so on, for example, when the infrastructure coordinator was here, that seemed to be acceptable to people. That process should continue. So we're using that as part of the process. But I think people are aware that we need logically, all right, to reassess what we've done and move on with a better, newer model of things to do for this generation moving forward. We cannot continue to use the model that was given to us for the generation in the 1960s and expect that will continue to become the model we continue to use from now on, when in fact a lot of things have changed, particularly in respect, for example, of communications and so on. I think the other aspect that they appreciated is the fact that the government is giving them a broader picture of what it's trying to do. It's not just a public service that we're looking after, but we're also trying to look after the people in the private sector as well as the old folks.
The consultations with all public sector will continue with the new Public Service Commissioners throughout the year. It is expected that the private and civil sectors will be included in the discussions to address its functions. Today, the Niue Meteorological Service launched Niue's Climate Data Report, a culmination of 3 years of research with the help of the Australian Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO. This is part of a 3-year project, the Pacific Climate Change Science Project, which covers 15 Pacific Island countries. The importance of data and research developed, especially into past weather patterns, is to make projections for future climate.
Well, certainly understanding what's happened in the past is really the key to being able to actually then try and predict what's going to happen in the future. And the Pacific Islands, in Niue, of course, in particular, haven't perhaps had as much work done on in the past. So it's about trying to understand what's happened in the past, and then we can look at what's happening in the climate in the future and provide some predictions. So we've seen in the past temperature has continued to rise quite steadily over the last I think the report looks from 1960 has continued to rise, and the projection is that it will continue to rise in the future, for example. My understanding is that in the last IPCC report for the global climate, there are only about 4 pages devoted to the Pacific. This now expands that to several hundred pages, and with obviously a specific section for Niue, which wasn't there before. So it's really about developing our understanding of Pacific climate that wasn't there, even on the global scale. It just wasn't there before. So this is really about contributing to our knowledge of the climate and climate change.
Through this project, 4 web-based tools were also developed, and the Met Service staff have been trained to utilize these tools in order to predict future climates. Based on the projections for Niue, it is predicted that temperatures will continue to increase. There will be a change in rainfall patterns, more extreme rainfall days, sea level will continue to rise, as well as ocean acidification, and less frequent but more intense tropical cyclones. These documents have also been translated into Vangahau-Niue. This week, government is reviewing the island's banking system to strengthen and employ an efficient and more robust service in its economic drive to boost the island's banking capabilities. Many residents have been calling for an introduction of an automated teller machine and internet banking. Among other services, they believe would be a big improvement to what is currently available, and according to Honourable Premier Taketahalangi, those issues are now addressed. Today, we caught up with the Honourable Premier Taketahalangi and asked him why a review of the banking system is necessary.
Well, the review is to determine whether the banking services we're getting at the present moment for the people of Niue are adequate, or whether we should be, and what we should be doing to look at what we can do to improve that.
Now, there's been some concerns as well from the only commercial bank as to why they weren't invited to the discussion.
The discussions are not with the manager of the bank here, unfortunately. We have held discussions with the head office, which is appropriately where we should be holding discussions of any kind with any reviews that we have. So it's not surprising that we're not necessarily talking to the manager here about substantial issues, but we are talking to them about the operational issues that they have and they're faced with at the present time. But the substantial discussions with regard to any reviews with banking services and agreements that we have with the bank has to be conducted with the head office and board of BSB in Whamuringi.
Now, this is part of the transformation processes that government is looking at, as in reviewing the banking system as well. Is government thinking of establishing another commercial bank here on the island?
No, the government is awaiting the report from the consultants to determine what steps it could take and what services it should be looking at to providing as banking services continue with BSB or to do something else and so on. We haven't been given any information as to what the consultants are going to advise us. We have told them what our requirements are, and what they're doing at the present moment is evaluating that information and then coming back to us to advise us as to what they believe to be the best options for Niue banking into the future. And you're absolutely right. We need to review some of these operations on a regular basis. And this is just part and parcel of what we're doing with the banking at the present moment. We have noted that with some of the services that are being provided or not provided, it's impacting on our earnings from tourism. And the tourists are coming here not spending their money because they're not able to access cash machines and so on, and credit card facilities and so on. So we'd like to see that we can improve that, because that's such a major and important part of what we're doing in tourism. If we don't have that right, then we spend a lot of money, and a lot of visitors coming in here get frustrated because they're not able to spend their money, and the people in the private sector are frustrated because they're not able to get the money off them.
Premier Talangi said government is awaiting the report from the 2 consultants to determine what is the right approach towards the island's banking system. Niue's school year finally got off to a start despite delays brought on by bad weather that had both schools closed for 2 days. Students and teachers were all set to start the new year, and we contacted both schools to see whether there were any changes to enrollment numbers this year. At the Niue Primary School, they have noted a slight increase with a total school roll of 202. From those numbers, 36 students at the Early Childhood Centre. These numbers are expected to increase throughout the year, and the school roll for last year was 194 at the beginning of the year. Principal Itsi Tukitonga says that some classes this year have up to 30 students, where in the past most classes have had up to at least 20 students each. There are also expected new intakes later in the year with families who will be making the move to Niue. At Niue High School, this year's enrollments have 82 boys and 68 girls, a total of 150, compared to last year's total school roll of 166. And Mr. James Boihanga has also been reappointed as the principal for Niue High School. The position was advertised at the end of last year, along with 10 other teaching positions, with 4 yet to be filled, hopefully by April. The Niue Public Service Commission says that senior management or leadership positions for both schools are on a contractual basis, and that will be reviewed each year. The cricket season is about to get off to a start this weekend, with 11 registered teams divided into 2 pools. The villagers in this year's competition will see Mutalau, Alofi, Tamkotonga, Makefu and Liku in Pool A. Pool B will include La Kepa, Hakupu, Tuapa, Hiktavake and Toi, Vaia and Avasele. Following the success of last year's competition and a demand from teams to continue with Kilikiki, the committee has decided that games will be held on a weekly basis. There have been some suggestions for bi-weekly games in light of personal commitments of teams, but due to the number of teams, the committee does not want the season to drag on for too long. So if all goes according to schedule, the Kilikiki season will end in April. And that concludes our news bulletin for this evening and for this week. We do hope that you have an enjoyable weekend ahead, especially to those who will be competing in the Kilikiki season. All the best.